How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to We the Fandom. Today, I'm reviewing Deadpool 3. Now, maximum effort isn't as popular a catchphrase as it was when Deadpool came to theaters in 2016, but it perfectly describes this film. Deadpool 3 is now my favorite MCU film of all time, but maybe not for the reasons you might think. There will be major spoilers all throughout this review, and I'm going to start off with a quick plot summary before giving my opinions. This might require me to explain a few concepts like the TVA. So, the Time Variance Authority, if you haven't watched Loki, are an organization that monitors time, protects the sacred timeline or 616 universe, and prunes or erases alternate timelines. There's also the concept of anchor beings, which is a person of such significance to a universe that their death leads to the death of that universe. It's usually not immediate, but it does start the rate of decay. And for Deadpool's universe, that character was Wolverine, who died in Logan, which officially ties the Logan film to Deadpool and Deadpool 2, as well as likely the other X-Men films. And this decay of Deadpool's universe is what sets up the crux of the plot. The TVA give Deadpool the chance to cross over and permanently live in the 616 universe, but it requires him to leave behind everyone that he knows and loves. So Deadpool goes rogue and uses a temp pad to recruit a Wolverine to help him save the world. Now, Deadpool is dealing with his own insecurity, which is a recurring theme throughout the film, and it stems from being dumped by his girlfriend, from getting turned down by the Avengers, and later as a result of Cassandra Nova messing with his mind. But he knows who Wolverine is. He's the X-Man, and now that both characters are enemies of the TVA, they are sent to the Void, a realm where all the people, things, and concepts pruned by the TVA end up. The two characters lead a group of freedom fighters against the tyrant Cassandra Nova, who is the evil twin sister of Charles Xavier. Though in an act of mercy, Wolverine spares Cassandra's life, and she gives Deadpool and Wolverine the ability to travel to Deadpool's home universe. But now they have to save it from her. To do that, Deadpool and Wolverine both intend to sacrifice themselves and cause the Time Ripper device to explode, which is the device that Agent Paradox of the TVA is using to destroy Deadpool's universe. But ultimately, both characters survive, defeat Cassandra Nova, and the TVA leave both Wolverine and Deadpool to continue to live on in this universe, which is saved from decay by this Wolverine acting as the new anchor being. That's kind of the quick rundown of the plot. And first thoughts, the movie was amazing. Absolute fun from beginning to end. There were surprising cameos, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the villains, Cassandra Nova and Paradox of the TVA, seemed a little bit one dimensional, but I think that that was perfect for this film. And in fact, I'd love to see Cassandra Nova come back whenever they make a proper X-Men film and have her be the villain. Speaking of, the ending wasn't what I was expecting. Not only did they not kill off Wolverine, but the two characters stayed in Deadpool's universe. So even though the characters as IP are now part of the MCU, they're not actually a part of the 616 universe, which is also confusing because at the beginning of the movie, Deadpool was in the 616 universe in 2018. This would be before Avengers Infinity War, so all the Avengers are still alive. He's being interviewed by Happy Hogan and ultimately turned down for the job of Avenger. Now, you could look at that as just a fourth wall breaking moment, but then the entire plot revolves around Deadpool choosing not to cross over into the 616. So, how did he get there in 2018? You could say he used the time device that he got from Cable, but how does time travel connect Deadpool's universe to the MCU when we have yet to see any evidence of where his universe would have branched off from the sacred timeline? There wasn't enough explanation for that, and it could probably be its own theory video. But the plot was great, villains were pretty good. In terms of the main characters and their story, Deadpool, like I said, is facing major insecurity. Vanessa broke up with him after the events of Deadpool 2 because, as he said, he was a one trick pony. He wasn't really moving on with his life. And I didn't really care for that because he spent the first two movies trying to win back and then get revenge for Vanessa. It doesn't make sense they would break up immediately after. But after the breakup, Deadpool got a job working as a car salesman after being turned down for the Avengers. He was probably turned down for a lot of reasons, but the main one was that Deadpool needed the job. And Happy's challenge to that was the Avengers don't exist because they need it, but because people need them. Now, I'd argue that characters like Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, and Natasha Romanoff do need the Avengers for various reasons, but I understand the reasoning as it pertains to the plot. In the end, Deadpool chooses to sacrifice himself to save his universe, even though the whole adventure took place because he needed to feel important. Pretty good story, heartfelt, but lighthearted at the same time as it should be. But of course, For most people, including myself, the main draw from this film is undoubtedly the return of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and he was amazing. I'm not just saying that it was amazing that Hugh Jackman came back, it was his acting, the story, the fight scenes, the costume, everything. X Men was the first superhero film that I ever saw, and by that point, I had already decided that Wolverine was my favorite character after seeing X Men the animated series. Being the shy, quiet kid that I was, and seeing someone like Wolverine who was tough and never afraid to speak his mind always made me want to be like him. Hugh Jackman has portrayed Wolverine for over 20 years now, and I've enjoyed every performance. Is he the perfect Wolverine? No, but I've appreciated every iteration for what it was, and I've watched his character be written and portrayed more like his comic book counterpart over time. The only knock on this Wolverine is that they didn't really flesh out his background, but we're led to believe that he is the worst Wolverine because he left the X-Men to go on one of his walkabouts right before they were massacred by humans. This leads to him viewing himself as worthless and not even standing up for himself when he's insulted by others. In some ways, he's a more comic book accurate Old Man Logan than Wolverine in the Logan film. His development throughout the story was interesting in comparison to the history of the live action character so far, because when you look back at the film version of Wolverine, he starts off in the X-Men trying to learn about his past and, of course, get with Jean Grey. He goes from that to fighting for the survival of mutant kind and becoming a father to now this Wolverine who's at such a low point that he just wants to be worthy of the costume that the X-Men made for him. It's a beautiful story, and I could go on about Wolverine forever, but now let's talk about the cameos. I'm not one to spaz out over cameos, but the montage of the different Wolverine variants was awesome. There was the comic accurate short Logan, there was Patch, Weapon X, which is the Wolverine from Age of Apocalypse, Wolverine from the cover of Incredible Hulk 340, Wolverine from the cover of Uncanny X-Men 251, and Henry Cavill Wolverine, which blew my mind. I did not expect that, and as unlikely as it is, I hope that Deadpool's line in the film is foreshadowing for Henry Cavill to play Wolverine after Hugh Jackman. But also, that Hulk scene needed to be longer. And I wish it was from Incredible Hulk 181. Technically, he had a cameo in issue 180, but his first real appearance is in 181. And I would have been okay if they had sacrificed the amount of time they spent on these other variants if they gave us just a little bit more of a Hulk versus Wolverine fight. Outside of the Wolverines, there is a number of X-Men villains making an appearance, some like Sabretooth, Toad, and Pyro, portrayed by the original actors. On the hero side, you have Elektra, which who cares, Blade, which was awesome. MCU fans deserve this version of Blade, not whatever craptastic version that Kevin Feige has failed to get off the ground for years now. Channing Tatum's Gambit actually surprised me. I enjoyed his performance far better than when Taylor Kitsch played Gambit in X-Men Origins Wolverine, and they also had a more comic book accurate Laura Kinney, which was cool. But easily the biggest cameo was Chris Evans returning as Johnny Storm from Fantastic Four. When he first appeared on the screen, no, when he first spoke, I would have sworn that it was Captain America, because he's wearing a blue cloak, you can't really see what's under it except blue. When he does lower his hood, it's Chris Evans sporting his natural hair color and style, which at first I thought was just an alternative take on Steve Rogers. Much like Steve in Infinity War with long hair and beard, Chris Evans mostly kept his natural hair color there as well. And there's a moment where you think he's about to say Avengers Assemble, but instead he says Flame On. And it genuinely surprised me. It did not occur to me that if the MCU convinced Chris Evans to return, that it would be as Johnny Storm. You also get a number of variants of Deadpool to form the Deadpool Corps, who Wolverine and Deadpool fight at the very end, which is led by Lady Pool, who is played by Ryan Reynolds' wife, Blake Lively. Deadpool 3 was an entertaining road trip story. It had the return of a fan favorite character and a long awaited team up. Surprises and cameos galore all made this film great, but what really brought it home for me was the fact that Deadpool and Wolverine was 100% unafraid and unashamed to be a comic book film. You had the costumes, finally putting Wolverine in costume, multiple comic book accurate costumes, and all except the short Wolverine were cool. And by the way, I don't see the short Wolverine as a satisfying conclusion to the argument. Asking for a comic accurate Wolverine has never been about CGIing someone's head onto what looked like a CGI body. Plus, the majority of fans aren't even asking for an actor that is actually Wolverine's height, just someone who isn't over 6 feet. Someone like Tom Hardy could be a good choice, He's like 5'9", 5'10", and we know he can get super jacked. But anyways, the costume looked badass, and it proved that they never had to avoid it. I also really enjoyed the poses and the cartoonishly violent fight scenes. This movie was hyper violent, and while comics don't usually have this much blood, the major fight scenes felt like they were ripped straight out of a comic book. And look at this pose Wolverine is when he leaps. It's completely unrealistic, but it's awesome. During his first fight with Deadpool, he either punches or throws Deadpool through a wall. And you might think, wait, Wolverine's powers are his healing factor, heightened senses, and bone claws. How does he have super strength? Well, in the comics, Wolverine is actually capable of lifting a couple tons as a result of his adamantium skeleton. But in the X Men films, Wolverine has always been portrayed as having maybe slightly above normal strength for someone his age and build, with a few exceptions being during his berserker rage. Another example of a certain character's ability to take a level of punishment far beyond what is realistic would be Johnny Storm, who at one point fell from like 50 feet in the air and hit his head on something. If he was a real person, if he had been in one of the older X-Men films, he would have broken his neck and he'd be dead. But in the comics, it's not uncommon for characters to survive things like that. Ultimately, it's a shame that the MCU felt like they needed a comedic, fourth wall breaking character to really bring recognizable and long avoided comic book tropes to life. Just imagine what could have been. We've had 4 phases of Marvel, dozens of films that could have been better than they were. As I said, Deadpool 3 is my favorite MCU film and definitely my favorite Deadpool film. It worked much better than Deadpool 2 because they brought in an A-list character and did the road trip thing, something that would have made Cable and Deadpool's story more interesting, but it's also the recognition that Deadpool is a side character. He needs to be paired up with a main X-Man or Avenger to truly thrive. But when all is said and done, the question we need to ask ourselves is, was Deadpool's criticism of the multiverse saga a moment of sincere reflection on behalf of Kevin Feige and the creative team at Marvel, or just another irreverent fourth wall break? Let me know what you think in the comments. Also, tell me who your favorite Wolverine variant was and which cameo you found to be most surprising. As always, if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell so that you never miss out on a new video. Thanks for watching.